Homicide at the Haunted House, Book 1 of the Nightmare, Arizona Paranormal Cozy Mysteries by Beth Dolgner. Chapter 1. I crested the hill and squinted as the late afternoon sun glared through my windshield. Ahead of me, the interstate stretched in a long, straight line for miles before finally disappearing into a cluster of hills, which were slowly darkening to a purple hue on the horizon. Red dots danced in my vision, and I blinked, willing my eyes to adjust. No, I realized, it wasn't the sun affecting me. I was seeing brake lights, a whole sea of them about a mile ahead. Beyond them, blue lights flashed. I couldn't see what had happened up there, but I knew it wasn't good. The 3 cars in front of me made a last-minute dive onto an exit ramp, and I followed suit. As the interstate continued down the hill and into the valley, I turned left onto a 2-lane road that bridged the interstate and wound south through the hills. An army of tall saguaros threw long shadows across the road, and scrubby trees clung desperately to the rocky slopes. Ever since I had crossed the state line into Arizona, the landscape had become increasingly desolate. Everywhere I looked, there was a different kind of cactus waiting to stab me. I sure hoped the drivers ahead of me knew where they were going. Their cars looked shiny and relatively new, which meant they probably had GPS. My car was so old it only had a radio and a CD player, and I hadn't owned any CDs for at least a decade. That meant I had been listening to local radio stations for the past 2 days and 5 states. The last time I knew so many top 40 songs, I was in college and a full 3 dress sizes slimmer. I didn't even have a cell phone anymore, so I couldn't use the map on that. With that thought, I pressed the gas pedal just a little harder to close the gap between me and the car ahead. There was no way I was going to risk losing sight of them on this winding road. I needed to be able to find my way back onto the interstate so I could finish up what had to be the most miserable road trip of my life. Just 5 more hours, and I would be at my brother's house in San Diego. Even if I stopped for some cheap gas station coffee, I would still make it there before midnight. There were no crossroads as I continued to follow the other cars south. The road was slowly gaining elevation, but it definitely wasn't curving west at all. We were going farther and farther away from the interstate. I had been driving on the road for at least 20 minutes when I saw another blinking light. This time, it wasn't from brake lights or police cars. It was the yellow check engine light on my dash. "Oh, come on," I moaned. My eyes darted across the dash, and I watched as the needle on the engine temperature gauge slowly moved upward. No, 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 please no. I need to get to San Diego tonight. Here's the thing about talking to your car. It doesn't talk back, and it definitely does not listen. Finally, I saw a stop sign coming up. The cars ahead of me were all turning right, going west again to parallel the interstate. When it was my turn at the intersection, I glanced right and saw nothing but more sharp plants and rocks. I looked straight ahead and saw a plywood sign with faded blue paint that read, "Repairs, oil changes, AC coolant, 3 miles ahead." I jumped at the sound of honking, and I glanced in my rearview mirror to see a line of cars snaking behind me, all waiting for their turn to get back to civilization too. I looked at my dash hopefully, but the engine temperature needle was still rotating toward the top of the gauge, creeping closer to the red, "Don't you dare keep driving" part. I sighed, switched off my turn signal, and went straight. "Only 3 miles, car," I said coaxingly. "You can do this." It couldn't. I had only gone about 1.5 miles when the dash suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. The temperature needle was buried in the red. I lost count of the expletives I muttered as I guided the car onto the narrow shoulder and turned it off. I was on a steep incline, so I pulled the parking brake and hoped the car would stay put. Actually, part of me hoped it would roll off the side of the hill, catch on fire, and explode on contact with the rocky valley below, but then I'd really be stranded. I figured there was no point trying to take any of my belongings with me. The little I had left to call my own would probably be safe out there. I hadn't passed a single car since I had gone straight through that stop sign. I grabbed my purse, locked up the car, and started walking. As I hoofed it up the incline, I noticed there were fewer cacti, but quite a few taller, leafier trees dotting the landscape. It seemed that the higher I climbed into the hills, the less threatening the plants were. It wasn't much of a silver lining, but it was all I had. It was hot out, probably 100 degrees or more, but at least the sun was sinking fast. By the time I finally spotted a whitewashed cinder block garage around a curve in the road, the sun had just sunk beneath the hills on the horizon. The same faded blue paint I had seen on the plywood sign was also on the side of the garage, with "Done Right Auto Repair" written in a flowing script. By the time I walked through the creaking wooden door at the front of the garage, I was sweaty, tired, and fighting the urge to just start yelling. It wasn't that I was mad at anyone. I was just fed up with the whole situation. "Be right with you," the man's voice echoed from a room behind the front office, and soon the body it belonged to appeared in the doorway. He somehow looked like the garage itself. His oil-streaked white overalls seemed too large on his lean frame, and his blue eyes were as faded as the paint on the sign. He smiled, his teeth bright in contrast to his tanned face. "Good timing. I was just closing up for the weekend. What can I do for you?" "For the weekend?" I repeated. I brushed a sweaty lock of auburn hair out of my eyes. "Yeah, I take weekends off so I can spend more time with my daughter." The man gave me a quick wink. "Unless, of course, it's an emergency." I waved vaguely in the direction I had come from. "My car overheated. I had to ditch it on the side of the road." The man nodded grimly. "That is an emergency. Let's get your car towed up here, then we'll figure out what's next. I'm Nick Dalton." "Olivia Kendrick." "Thanks." Nick pulled a rag with even more oil and dirt on it than his overalls out of a pocket. He wiped his hand on it before reaching out. I tried to keep my grimace to a minimum as I shook his proffered hand, since I had no interest in being covered in oil too. Nick's grip was warm and firm, and I was surprised to feel my lips start to turn up into a genuine smile. There was just something comforting about him. I might be stranded in the middle of nowhere, I thought, but at least I'm stranded with this guy. In just a few minutes, I was sitting uncomfortably in the passenger seat of Nick's tow truck. The springs sagged, and a rip in the faux leather upholstery had been covered up with silver duct tape that squeaked every time I shifted. Nick asked me a steady stream of questions as we drove, like where I was headed, where I had come from, and how I had managed to stray so far from the interstate. When we pulled up next to my car and came to a stop, Nick whistled. "You came all the way from Nashville in that?" He sounded both horrified and impressed. "It's all I could afford," I said stiffly, shrugging. Nick looked at me keenly. "I just didn't think someone carrying such an expensive designer purse would drive a hunk of junk like that." Ouch. I made a mental note that even though Nick looked like a mess, his mind was sharp. I instinctively clutched my purse closer. When I had sold everything off, I had flat out refused to get rid of my purse. Some things were non-negotiable. It was nearly dark already, and Nick grabbed a big silver flashlight from a box that sat between the driver and passenger seats. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he said, before sliding deftly out of the tow truck. I got out a lot less gracefully, scrambling my way down. Nick was already opening the hood of my car, though, so at least he hadn't witnessed my awkward exit. I walked over to him, and my eyes followed the beam of his flashlight, which he trained at my radiator. I crossed my arms and tried to look like I understood what I was seeing. Nick suddenly dropped onto his knees to peer underneath the car. He stood up again, produced that same dirty rag, and pulled the dipstick out of the oil reservoir. I suppressed a sardonic laugh. The last car I'd owned hadn't even had a dipstick for checking oil. The car's computer would simply know if the oil was low and beam a message to the dash to tell me it needed service. "I hate to say it, but you've got an oil leak," Nick said. To his credit, he actually did sound sorry about giving me such bad news. "I had hoped you just needed to top off your radiator fluid, but it's going to take more than that." Nick turned to me with a sympathetic expression. Even if I order the parts first thing in the morning, they won't arrive until Monday or Tuesday. We don't have that same-day service like in the big cities. I bit my lip as I quickly and silently did the math in my head. Repairs to the oil system on my car, plus at least 3 nights in a motel, were going to add up fast. Nick seemed to know what I was thinking because he grinned at me. Luckily, my parents own a local motel, and they're always happy to give a discount to my customers. I nodded. My only other choice was to ask if there was a couch at the garage I could crash on. Nick got my car hooked up to his tow truck, and we made the short drive back to his garage. Once he unhooked my car, I unloaded my 2 suitcases of clothes, leaving the few boxes of keepsakes in the trunk. I wouldn't need those for the motel. The drive to the motel was a cramped one. I had expected Nick to have a normal car, but we climbed into the tow truck again. Nick had managed to wedge one of my suitcases behind the seats, but the other was balanced half on my lap and half on the box between us. Every time we hit a bump, I worried the suitcase would knock into Nick's arm and send us careening off the road. We only drove about a mile before I started seeing a few houses and side streets. We passed a building with several shops in it, and then we rounded a curve, and I found myself looking at a sleepy little town. I couldn't see much in the dark, but the soft yellow streetlights stretched across a relatively flat space dotted with low buildings. A neon sign blinked on the left-hand side of the road. Green letters reading Cowboys Corral Motor Lodge were topped by a yellow cowboy hat. "Here we are," Nick said proudly. The motel itself looked as mid-century kitsch as the neon sign. It was made of white cinder block, like the garage, and it had 2 wings that ran straight back from the street, with parking spaces in between them. At the front of the motel, centered between the driveways that led into and out of the parking area, there was a small 2-story building with neon signs in the front windows that read "Office" and "Satellite TV." Nick pulled up right in front of the office. He had already climbed out and unloaded both of my suitcases by the time I had made it out of the passenger side. If I was going to be riding around town with him, I would really have to work on my exit skills. Nick opened the glass front door of the office, then ushered me into a room with a thick brown carpet and a front desk made of formica. The woman behind the counter had a grin that was identical to Nick's, and she spread her plump arms in a welcoming gesture. "Welcome to Nightmare, Arizona,"